So, on the newest episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, things got way too heated, people. Bill Maher, famed for his no-nonsense manner, finds himself in what you might call a maelstrom of woke views. You know, those ideas that sometimes seem to, well, toss reason out of the window? Yeah, those. It all went down when Maher pushed his panel about the delicate topic of school closures during the outbreak.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Republicans would say that it was the teachers' union, which is very strong and democratically controlled, that made sure that the schools did not reopen.
Well, and
also that it's not the kids who were dying from it.
Right, and that's the big shame, is that the kids who were getting hurt the most by it were the ones whose parents don't have the resources to say, well, the public school's bad, let me take them out and put them in a private school. Or, sure, I can homeschool them, I have the bandwidth to do that. It was poor kids, kids of color, they're the ones who have seen the biggest learning loss as a result of all of this.
Malcolm?
And let me tell you, the arguments, well, they got really out of hand. These aren't merely inconsequential matters. We're talking about substantial effects for kids' education and society.
I saw that today in the paper also. A lot of the students who went away during the pandemic never came back. What do you make of that?
Yeah, school is good. Community education, communal education is good because you have to develop social skills. The hardest part about school is like recess and gym and all the times you have to interact with all those other little 10-year-olds. So I think it's really important for kids to be back in school.
I do too. But I mean...
Well, it can create a fiscal problem for a school too. So most schools, the way they get their funding is how many kids are enrolled. If all of a sudden your enrollment falls by 5 or 10%, your funding falls by 5 or 10%. So the fact that public schools, for so many parents, they said, I don't know if I trust this institution to educate my child anymore. It's also going to potentially make the schools worse or have to do more with less when that student funding is now gone.
And also, I mean, you say you think kids should be in school. It's the Democratic Party, your party, that is blamed for that not happening during the pandemic.
Right, and it happened in Republican states and Democratic states, and all those leaders were doing the best they could with the science that was available. But there were some. Ezekiel Emanuel is a doctor who was advising Biden, was saying at the time, this is going to hurt kids. We should be really careful about closing schools. And I remember Zeke saying that. So but I don't want to bang on people who were trying to save lives when we lost 1 million people, that stinking virus. We're still losing 500-600 a day.
But it was clear much earlier on than many Democratic leaders in particular.
Well, the Republicans didn't put them back in school either.
They did a lot faster. And that's...
Yeah.
But wait, before we dig deeper, ever thought how it feels to disturb the norm? And additionally, I mean, you say you think kids should be in school. It's the Democratic Party, your party, that gets criticized for that not happening during the outbreak, right? And it happened in Republican states and Democratic states. And all those things were doing the best they could given the science. All right, so back to the heated back and forth that unfolded on Real Time with Bill Maher. It opened, quite fittingly, with Bill Maher addressing the elephant in the room, the effects of pandemic school closures. Now, Maher has always been our straight shooter. He doesn't shy away from talking about things others might find too difficult to handle. Maher focused on how school closures harmed disadvantaged children, criticizing panelists who hid behind vague appeals to science. He questioned the worn-out narrative and doubted the political justifications offered by both Democratic and Republican leaders. Using examples like Florida's earlier reopenings, he asked whether decisions were truly about children's welfare or political gain. Maher didn't just target policy, but also called out the unions and bureaucratic systems that seemed more driven by ideology than actual solutions.
Everything you said is valid. All that is an issue. This seemed to be just 5 cops who wanted to wail on a guy for no apparent reason. If that kid had been white, would they have not done that?
No, they wouldn't have. Period. We all know that.
So 5 black...
I mean, there is a color issue within law enforcement altogether.
Even among black cops?
Yeah, because they're cops.
Because they're cops.
This is a mindset, the same way we have in the military. We have a mindset, right? I think policing now has moved so far away from community service towards self-preservation. They go to courses like the On Killing program on how to do self-preservation, how to battle like a special forces soldier. What they need to do is they need to start thinking more along the old beat cop, protecting the community by knowing the community and not seeing. I don't understand it, right? I'm a big guns guy. Not every black man is the one who has the firearm, right? They assume this block is all armed. Maybe that's because some of them are. But I'm going to tell you, there is a large proportion of the white population in the United States who routinely carry guns openly, brazenly, have stickers on their cars, and cops just say, oh, these are the kind of guys that I go to range with. Good job. Kyle Rittenhouse, for example, right? They threw him water that night. If I had been out on the street with a long rifle like that, they would have been throwing lead down there, freedom bullets at.
He addressed how the teachers' unions, especially in Democrat-led districts, retained influence over decisions, maybe holding back reopening schools despite increasing evidence of huge setbacks children experienced in the long run. Then there's the vociferous clamor over the disproportionate consequences borne by youngsters, generally striking hardest at communities of color. Here, Maher was angry. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about real lives, real futures, kids formerly on a promising path now forced off course simply because they didn't have, well, the luxury of alternatives like private schools, or homeschooling that rich families may access more freely. Maher began to question the true motives behind extended school closures, wondering if the real threats were ever properly considered or if the most affected voices were ignored. He criticized the overused saving lives excuse as a way to silence debate and avoid accountability. His guests struggled to defend their positions, resorting to vague claims. Maher highlighted how the pandemic worsened existing inequalities and how differing scientific views were shut down. Shifting focus, he tackled systemic issues in law enforcement, pointing out how racial bias and flawed institutions continue to harm the disadvantaged. His frustration grew into disbelief as he challenged whether real lessons had been learned, or if society was stuck in a cycle of failure masked as progress.
Who killed Tyree Nichols had been white, would we be seeing a different response?
I'm afraid to say that we would have. I think that we would have had a slow walk of the indictments. But the issue here isn't about the color of the policeman. The issue is that the tactics, techniques, procedures, and training of these law enforcement officers on these special teams. Way back when I went through a SWAT officers course with Capitol Hill Police and some other police forces that were there to learn how to be SWAT cops. The techniques that we were shown back then were not always guns forward, guns all the time. Now the average police officer is trained to believe that he's, number one job is to come home at night. I agree with that 1,000%. But there are jobs there, there are things there that are just clearly require an intervention that does not require you to draw your weapon.
Yeah, this doesn't, that certainly...
Again, he questioned viewers and his panel. Do these systems serve us, or are we merely actors in their automatic efficiency, their self-preserving agenda? Bill Maher wasn't only talking to his studio audience. His words, his wrath, they pierced directly through the screen, reaching everybody wanting to listen. As these lectures simmered with emotional intensity, he bridged the gap between criticism and collective action, asking us to pause and scrutinize, just where our allegiances lay, academically speaking. Were Maher's ideas a tragic reflection on a detached elite, surrounded in echo chambers and privileges? Perhaps, but there was a calling to lift discourse beyond dissatisfaction. Or maybe, alerting us to why it matters, taking action when options are clouded by dogma, rather than rationality or compassion. So, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you don't want to miss out on the hottest celebrity news, make sure to subscribe to Daily Finder.